Thank you for inviting me to this wonderful conference from which I have already learned so much. I apologize for the length of the paper that I have uploaded on the site, but I will here summarize only its key points. In some respects, the sacred city of Varanasi is like the philosopher's ship of Theseus. Built, torn down, and rebuilt over centuries, it remains for Hindu believers the same city, although it is materially different from its past embodiments. This is true in general terms, of course, of all cities, which, like human persons, may carry one name and even one identity through the temporal flow of change. The thought problem of the ship of Theseus draws attention to the intersection of history and memory, structure and identity, the idea of an object, place, or event, and that object's life in time. Varanasi, of course, has not kept the same name. It was anciently known as Kashi and is commonly called Benares. It's a city believed to have been continuously inhabited for the last 2,000 years. There are many questions about this, but there is archaeological evidence for settlements on this site. It's been also repeatedly destroyed and rebuilt to new architectural and ideological ends. Its ritual geography was fixed only around the 12th to the 14th centuries, so while there are claims of timeless antiquity for the Kashi Kshetra, the actual rites and rituals concerning pilgrimage in this region are fixed really quite late in the late medieval or even early modern period. Frequently referenced in colonial histories are the destruction of temples in the wake of Muslim assaults beginning in the very late 12th century with Muhammad Ghori's sacking of Varanasi after defeating the local Hindu ruler of Kanauj, and extending up to the demolition of the temples of Vishwanatha and Bindu Madhava, reportedly ordered by the Mughal Emperor Aurangzeb in 1669. And a firman does exist regarding his, the ordering of the destruction of these temples. In fact, particularly mentioning the Vishwanatha temple, Bindu Madhava is actually not mentioned. But right through this period, while mosques and tombs were built using spolia from temple sites, there was also a continuous process of rebuilding of Hindu temples, religious schools, and palaces, and refurbishing of pilgrimage routes, both under the Sultanate and later by Rajput chieftains acting as Mughal mansabdars. Many historians see the city as constantly reconstructed through representation, obliteration, salvage, and reinvention, especially the invention of tradition. This urban landscape is also, of course, connected to social and economic orders, the practices of daily life, pilgrims and visitors, culture, learning, rituals, and faith. Varanasi's waterfront was largely rebuilt in the 18th century by Maratha rulers as Mughal power declined, and it's dominated by its ghats, a very spectacular aspect of the city. And I have already in an earlier conference talked about the ghat as a site of overlapping spatialities, connecting land to water, and therefore acting as a kind of switch or crossover between different spatial modes. My focus in this presentation is on the operation of history and memory at the northern Panchaganga Ghat, believed to mark the confluence of the Ganga with 4 other now hidden streams, and dominated by the imposing height and 3 domes of the Alamgir or Dhaurohara Masjid, an impressive red sandstone structure commenced around 1674 by the Mughal Emperor Aurangzeb after demolishing the Bindu Madhava Vishnu temple that had stood on the site. The mosque, its foundations reportedly as deep as the building's elevation and incorporating, so people say, the pillars of the destroyed temple, was earlier distinguished by the height of its minarets, each 64 meters tall, according to ASI data, at one time the highest and slenderest in Mughal architecture and dominating early views of the city from the river. So I'll just run through a few of these views. You can see the minarets there. They are no longer there, which is why I'm showing them to you in these scenes. So these are colonial artists showing the city and the riverbank dominated by the mosque and its minarets. Now, this is the ghat from the river today, because although the minarets were repaired in the early 19th century by the British antiquary James Prinsep, then assay master at the Benares Mint, one of the minarets collapsed in a storm in 1948. Not 1984, 1948, and the other was taken down for reasons of safety. The splendor, meanwhile, the splendor of the Bindu Madhav temple, which the mosque reportedly replaced, there is no surviving evidence of this, apart from the testimony of a French traveler, Tavernier, from his visit to Varanasi in 1665. And he makes a very elaborate description of the Bindu Madhav temple, which he places amongst the four most celebrated pagodas of the Indian idolaters, as he calls them, along with those in Jagannath, Mathura, and Tirupati. And it's very remarkable that visiting Varanasi, he does not speak of the Vishwanatha temple, but of the Bindu Madhava temple, a Vaishnava temple, not a Shiva temple, on the river bank. And this is likely to have been refurbished in the 17th century by Rajput rulers of Amer, modern Jaipur in Rajputana, and because adjacent buildings on the river bank were certainly refurbished or rebuilt by Maharaja Man Singh and his successor Mirza Raja Jai Singh. So it does seem then to have belonged to a period of intensive temple reconstruction and religious patronage in Varanasi by Rajput rulers functioning against under imperial authority as favored nobles of the Mughal authority. And Tavernier was struck not only by the magnificence and splendor of the temple, but also by its position on the Panchaganga ghat, which he describes in detail. And he talks about the steps and the placing of shrines on the steps of the ghat, and the way in which the steps of the ghat involves a kind of ascent through a sacred space to another very sacred and magnificent space. And this is described by later visitors to the ghat as well. My interest is in the complex intersection of mosque, ghat and temple at this site, and the temporality that binds them in a narrative of obliteration and renewal, forgetting and reinvention that is characteristic of urban space in Varanasi. The memory of the temple persists through 19th century representations of the ghat, which is commonly referred to as Madhurai's ghat or Madhudas ka Deora, although it is the mosque and its minarets that are prominent in descriptions of the site. Its interior, however, is relatively austere and undecorated. These are my photographs. There are some photographs by other photographers, which I am just running through. It's quite an austere building. You can see a solitary worshipper outside the mosque. The interior is quite plain, not very much decorated. These are views from the roof. Its views are stunning because of the height of the mosque and its position on the ghat. As in many other 17th and 18th century structures in Varanasi, there is some mingling of Hindu and Islamic architectural motifs, but the emphasis on plainness and the building's grandeur is largely the effect of its position and elevation. I should say that the first time I visited the mosque, I did so in December 1993, 1 year after the destruction of the Babri Masjid, the turning point of modern Indian history in any, I think, in any sensible estimation. In December 1992, the the demolition of the Babri Masjid constituted a kind of radical assault on the foundation, on the secular foundations of the Indian state. And visiting this mosque in December 1993, I was struck by the precarity of this building, given the claims that were already being made to sacred sites in Mathura and Varanasi by advocates of Hindutva. The Bindu Madhav temple, by the way, has also been rebuilt by a Rajput chieftain, but occupies a relatively modest position next to, on the northern side of the mosque, and painted a cheerful yellow. It attracts a vibrant community of devotees. It is a very, very cheerful and pleasant building, constantly surrounded by devotees, and with a terrace where people sit and enjoy the sun. And there are other religious buildings around this site as well. Entry to the temple is unrestricted, though there is usually a woman outside selling flowers and so on. I don't have the time, and I will really conclude very soon, I don't have the time now to elaborate on my study of this very complex co-spatiality of the scene, the way in which many religious elements, many kinds of buildings, residential houses, the silk factory, other monasteries, monastic establishments occupy this space on the top of the ghat, sorry. But I want to move on to the latest example of reconstruction in Varanasi by way of a contrast with what we find on the Panchaganga ghat, which after that terrible act of demolition by Aurangzeb and the rebuilding of a structure and the building of a structure there, the erection of the mosque, is more or less as it has been through several centuries. This is, we passed through Manikarnika Ghat. This is the most sacred spot in Banaras, the cremation ghat of Manikarnika. This is the flame that never goes out on the right. And yes, so we move now to the new Kashi Vishwanath corridor created by the Member of Parliament for Varanasi, Narendra Modi, the Prime Minister of India, created on a new authoritarian model. This corridor has been created by razing to the ground hundreds of shops and houses, many with very ancient shrines inside them, in order supposedly to open up access from the river and the city to the Vishwanatha temple through an open paved promenade, later to be lined with rest houses, tourist centers and the like. The river bank right next to the Manikarnika cremation ghat is lit by surreal rocket-like light posts standing in the water. And there are statues of Rajput heroes like Haldiabai Holkar and Bharat Mata. Most curious of all are what look like triumphal arches, rather like the colonial gateways built by the British in Mumbai and Delhi, the Gateway of India, India Gate and so on. Like imperial arches, they make a statement of power over a desolated scene. And what is also curious is that they use the foliated multifoil arch, which is very characteristic of Mughal sculpture, Mughal architecture, and therefore continue the tradition of Mughal architecture in Varanasi. The entirety of this space is the creation of the Modi's chosen architect, Bimal Patel, responsible for the concretizing of the Sabarmati riverfront in Ahmedabad and the making of the Central Vista in Delhi. But, it's not the arches alone, but the creation of this space, which is the most shocking feature of the Kashi Vishwanath corridor. Openness except at the riverfront has never been a feature of Varanasi. Rather, reconstruction and layering is Varanasi's principal features. And if we consider, the distinction that Nora makes between sites of memory and environments of memory, if we think of them in the context of a historical moment, a turning point when there is a consciousness of a break with the past, I don't want to hazard a guess as to whether the Panchaganga Ghat is an actual environment of memory. But in fact, memory is here, as it is always, partial, incomplete, and made up. But it is certainly intertwined with history and space. On the Panchaganga Ghat, memory itself is intertwined with history and space in a way that doesn't seem to be the case with the erasure, with the practice of erasure of memory on the in the Kashi Vishwanath corridor. Yes. So I am now concluding with a final few photos, but I wanted to actually end with this. Our boatman, Bhumi Nishad, who was really one of the principal persons responsible for allowing me to make these journeys, I want to conclude with a
यह बनारस हर रसों का रस है, यह बनारस जिनको आना है आ जाए बनारस में बना हुआ रस को पी ले गटागट, यह बनारस यह बनारस बना हुआ रस, यह बनारस बना रस पीले गटा गट, यह बनारस भैया सदियों से बना हुआ, यह बनारस भैया सदियों से बना